I'm Brent James, Intermountain Healthcare's Chief Quality Officer. I also lead the Intermountain Institute for Healthcare Delivery Research. Congratulations! You've made it to the 5th and final module in the Intermountain 100% participation course. In this module, we will introduce a method called rapid cycle improvement. It builds on the definitions and tools contained in the earlier 4 modules. It then applies data-based problem solving to find solutions to real problems in real daily work. Rapid cycle improvement was first described by Dr. Tom Nolan and is the topic of a foundational book called The Improvement Guide. Even with good intentions, not all changes turn out to be for the better. Dr. Nolan defines rapid cycle as change that results in improvement. Rapid cycle improvement has 2 main parts. The first part sets the stage for measured change. That framework comes by generating answers to 3 central questions. Number 1, what are we trying to accomplish? Number 2, how will we know that a change is an improvement? And number 3, what changes might we make that might result in improvement? The first 2 elements of the improvement framework link directly to the tools that you learned and applied as you completed Module 4 in this course. The aim statement you created in Module 4 is a direct response to the first question. It documents what you are trying to accomplish with sufficient focus and detail to be useful for actual improvement. Annotated run charts answer the second question. Your primary annotated run chart derives from and links directly back to your aim statement. It tracks the outcome defined in your aim statement over time. As you introduce change, it will give you objective information to tell whether your change actually produced improvement. The third question is a bit more complicated than it looks. Those complexities will be the topic of a later module in the extended course. At this point, though, it takes the form of a simple rule. We ask that you generate a minimum of 4 legitimate different change ideas that could plausibly move your process outcomes in the direction laid out in your aim statement. When faced with a problem, human beings have an inborn tendency to jump to solutions. Usually we subconsciously assess a problem, in other words, without benefit of sufficient data, then we quickly select a solution. We then show amazing commitment to that one proposed solution. Humans will spend stunning amounts of time and resources trying to pound that large round peg into that small square hole. We ask you to start with at least 4 possible solutions to overcome that natural tendency. Long experience has shown that most initial change ideas simply don't work. A good improver understands that you fail towards success. You need both resilience and flexibility. Resilience means that you are willing to try and try again until you finally reach demonstrated success. It's the idea that it doesn't count as a failure until you give up and quit. Flexibility means that you are not just open to other change ideas, but that you actively seek them out. That is one important key to true creativity in a work setting. The concept of failed towards success brings us to the second part of rapid cycle improvement. One of the best ways to learn the intricate details of a real process is to watch it closely as a change attempt fails. Such experience can teach a very great deal about the underlying work process. In other words, when doing rapid cycle, you have 2 sources of information. The first is your annotated run charts. They supply objective data about whether the change you introduced worked. The second is the hands-on experience of frontline workers intimately familiar with the work process because they live with it every day. While the measurement contained in an annotated run chart is quantitative learning, the experience of knowledgeable frontline workers is qualitative learning. Both are critical. The nuts and bolts of a rapid improvement cycle were first described by Dr. Walter Shewhart in the 1920s. He was a research physicist at AT&T Bell Labs and was working in an AT&T subsidiary, Western Electric, telephone equipment plant. He wanted to teach workers in those plants how to do measured scientific hypothesis testing as part of their work. Those workers had very little formal education. In fact, many were technically illiterate. But that doesn't mean that they weren't smart and capable. Shewhart reduced scientific hypothesis testing to 4 simple steps. He called it PDSA cycles. First, you plan a change. The P in PDSA stands for plan. That corresponds to the list of change ideas that you generated in setting up for Rapid Cycle. Each idea, in Shewhart's words, was a planned change. Second, you do the change. The D in PDSA stands for do. You implement your change in a small test. Please note that the change can be huge. It's the test that's small. In other words, you try your change idea within your work process. Third, you study the results. The S in PDSA stands for study. You examine both the quantitative data contained in your annotated run chart and the qualitative data that comes from your own hands-on experience. Finally, you act upon what you find. The A in PDSA stands for act. If your change worked, if it produced change that was an improvement as documented in your annotated run chart, you implement it fully and set about running your new, better process. If it didn't work in the direction or to the extent that you wanted, you cycle back, refine your change ideas based on the deeper insight that the PDSA cycle has produced, and try again with another PDSA cycle. This is a graphical representation of rapid cycle improvement. Each PDSA cycle, even if it fails, teaches you more about the underlying process. You have both quantitative and qualitative information to support the next change attempt. Over time, you move from a series of hunches about tentative change ideas that might work into changes that produce documented better performance. Based on long experience, I can tell you that sometimes you'll hit a home run on your first swing. Occasionally, your first PDSA cycle to test a change idea will produce results far in excess of your stated aim. Most times, though, you will need to loop back and learn from experience. The key is that the method works. Persistent attention to planned, measured change produces significant results. We close with the last definition. The rapid in rapid cycle improvement refers to how quickly you can test a change. Later modules in the extended course series will address this topic directly. At this point, though, it takes the form of this question. If today you can test a change in 3 months, how could you change your work environment so that you could test a change in only 1 month? If you can presently test a change in a month, how could you shorten that time to a week? How could you go from a week to a day? Or from a day to 1 test per hour? Now there are obvious limits based on the work process you are attempting to improve, on how rapid your improvement cycles can become. The idea, though, is that you use rapid cycle to improve your improvement process just as you use it to improve your daily work process. That brings us to the exercise associated with this module and the final exercise for the course. Would you please generate a list of change ideas around the opportunity identified in your aim statement? Then launch rapid PDSA cycles to find solutions that show documented improvement. As always, make sure that you attend a debrief session with your coach before you start the exercise. Obviously, your coach will be a key ally in this final step.